My name's Kevin Mikslaz, and I work with a company called Iridescent. And what I'd like to tell you about today are two things: persistence and failure and how they're related. And I'd like to tell this through a personal narrative of how I've encountered these two things throughout my life. I'll wait for the start. This was where I went to school on the northwest side of Chicago, and I was generally a pretty good student. I showed up to class on time, I did my homework, I got good grades, and I did all the things that school told me I should do. When I got home, I played video games, and I played a lot of video games. I would play for hours on end, and I would get frustrated. I would lose, slam my controller on the ground, but something kept drawing me back to the video games, and I kept coming back and playing them again and again. So the question I want to ask you for a second is, which activity do you think taught me persistence? Video games or school? Didn't expect an answer. I thought it was going to be reflective, but that's cool. So let's jump ahead about 20 years. This is me as a PhD student in a biophysics program. And if there's anything that requires persistence, let me tell you, it's sticking around through a PhD for 5 years, especially when your fieldwork involves waking up at 3 a.m. for low tides on windy, wavy days. And so as I was reflecting on my early morning adventures, I realized that the persistence I gained in one part of my life was transferring to other parts of my life as an adult, and it was a skill that stuck with me in many contexts. As I was thinking about persistence in my life, I started volunteering with an organization called Iridescent as a grad student. Iridescent teaches after-school science programs through open-ended design challenges where kids build things. And what I loved about Iridescent's activities was they were just like filled with failure. You couldn't do an activity and not mess up at some point in the process. If you look at these, this is building a self-launching catapult. The first design a kid did almost never worked. And it took the third, fourth, sometimes fifth design until they finally achieved success. But they kept going till they achieved success. And so if you watch a kid go through this process, there were kind of 3 stages. First, fear, humiliation, and failure at their initial failure. Second, there was a persistent focus as they realized what they needed to do to fix it, and finally, jubilation at their eventual success. And I didn't think there wasn't any sort of magic way that Iridescent found all the persistent kids in the neighborhood, but rather they created persistence. They realized that persistence in students required failure in activities. If there was nothing to fail at, there was nothing to persist through. And so they really carefully crafted their activities in a way that led to failure. So I like to present to you as sort of the Iridescent recipe for failure. So if you want to create an activity that has good failure, here's some tips on how to do it. So let's go through these one by one. First of all, you need to reduce the size of failure. Instead of giving kids one big way that they fail at the end of a semester, you need to give them a myriad of small, inconsequential ways that they fail throughout the learning process. What this means is that, step 2, failure should be an extremely common process, since it occurs everywhere throughout the learning process, but a temporary state, something that's always waiting to be transferred from a failure into a success, and challenging the students to move beyond that failure. To make this possible, we need step 3, which is very clearly benchmarking what is success, making it exceptionally obvious to students when their failure is no longer a failure and when it becomes a success. And to me, this is what badges hold real potential for, is this benchmarking tool. One of the things I think that can be really helpful about them. So since we're at DML, I would like to tell you about an online curriculum portal called the Curiosity Machine that I've been working on with Iridescent, and how I try to incorporate these 3 ingredients into online learning activities. And so here's what an activity looks like on that website. There's 2 columns. In the left column is a list of instructions of what you do to complete the activity. On the right-hand column is a bunch of questions you answer about the design as you're building it. And the important part of all these instructions is just this blue text right on the top. That's this one-line succinct design challenge, what we call it. It lays out very clearly for kids what they need to do to be successful. It's challenging, meaning they usually fail at their first attempt, and it also very clearly benchmarks success. Second, when kids answer questions on the website, they get one of 2 answers. They get try again, meaning you failed, or great idea, meaning you did it. Since there's several questions per activity, we give them a variety of ways to fail and make that a very common response. But the phrasing of try again makes it clear it's a very temporary state, and they can transfer to success. Third is they answer questions correctly. They get points and move up a leveling badging system on the website. And what this does is it creates an initial state of failure. You start at 0 points, and then you move up and see your success as a way of building upon your accomplishments. So the thought I'd like to leave you with is that if we want to have a generation of more persistent students, then we need to create activities that have common failure and epic success. Thanks.